good evening to you, all of you. Those of you who are watching us from way out in North America, those of my friends watching us in uh, Switzerland. We have some friends watching us in Turkey, and of course, we want to send you our condolences and to express our concerns for your safety while all kinds of things are happening there, earthquakes and so on. To our friends in the Caribbean, thank you for joining us every Wednesday. And to our friends right home in Guyana, we want to say thank you for tuning in to Advancing the Cause. Of course, last week I missed you, and I'm sure you missed me last week. But we have a few things happening, and we're on outreaches here and there, and we have public meetings. And as a result of those activities, we couldn't have Advancing the Cause last week. However, we're here this week, and we've got lots and lots of things to talk about. Plenty things we've got to talk about this week. And so this week, we are going to focus primarily on the man. And this man, some people call him the legend, some people call him the leader, some people call him the visionary way beyond his time. But we all know this man, and I want to say to all of us that his legacy will continue to live on, regardless of how some people try to paint him or how much they try to prevent other persons from learning about this man and what he did for this country. His legacy would continue to live on. We can't erase that. And so we're going to talk about that a little later. But I want to say happy birthday to those who would have celebrated their birthdays during last week and this week. Happy birthday to you. I trust that as you grow a year older, that you are going to be inspired, you're going to be committed, and you're going to be dedicated to the cause of what we're doing here, advancing the cause towards making our country a better country and towards making yourself a better person. And so may God continue to bless you. We've had some deaths around, and we want to extend our sincere condolences to those families who have lost loved ones. And we want to ask that God will continue to bless you, continue to give you that comfort that you need at this time, and to give you the strength you need to go on in the face of that loss. But on our highlights this evening, I want to share with you very quickly. One, I'm excited. You notice my colors, national colors. I'm flaunting because we are mashes in the air, and so we are 53 years old now as a republic, and many are asking the question that I'm asking: 53 years old, and where are we? Where are we after being 53 years old as an independent nation? And so you would have recognized that lots and lots of our schools had Culture Day, and they had Mash Tramp around their schools. And I feel so excited. I'm so excited because our children are having a part, and they're enjoying what is part of us, what is part of our culture. They're enjoying the sacrifices that were made by some of our great men and women in order to help us to achieve this status as a Republican country. And a little more on our highlights. We saw Kanu intercepting a vehicle with registration number PHH 9387 with 3 bricks of cannabis after acting on information. And so 2 persons are in custody. The cannabis, it is said, weighed 3.3 pounds with a street value of 500,000 Guyana dollars. And then we had, not long after that, we had a man, 27 years old, who was sentenced to 18 years in prison for raping a little young boy, 5 years old. And then we saw a security guard attached to Guy America Security Services. He was arrested for gunplay in the Eccles housing scheme there. And sometimes we wonder what's wrong with these people. Persons are just being given guns of all types, and they don't know to operate these weapons, and so they have all kinds of gunplay there, bringing fear into the minds and so on of residents living in that area. But I know that our police are taking action, and I'm hoping that that young man is going to be dealt with accordingly. More on that, we recognize that again, there is going to be some emergency repair works on the Demerara Harbor Bridge. And so on the 25th and the 26th, the Demerara Harbor Bridge is going to be out of service. And so our water taxis are going to be in full operation for those 2 days. I'm hoping that after we would have done these repairs to span 8, then we are not going to have the Demerara Harbor Bridge being closed again, because you know what happens when that happens, it throws quite a lot of persons out of sync in terms of what they have to do, especially those persons who are driving. And then we had a little big one happening just recently, where we saw 9 young men, 9 young men being charged. They were charged, yes, they were charged and they passed through court yesterday. They were charged for terrorism, and they were placed on $300,000 bail each. They were asked to lodge their passports and to report to the court, to the police station every fortnight. Now, these are 9 young men, and this is as a result of the protest action that we had, where residents felt that the police nor the government was taking action, and they had this protest march in wake of the shooting of young Bacchus. And so residents marched from the Bacchus, from Golden Grove, as a matter of fact, and they were heading to Georgetown to get some answers. Of course, we had some criminal elements who joined that parade, and they created havoc among the people living further afield, their Mon Repose and so on. But here is it: 9 young men, 9 innocent young men have been charged for terrorism, and we're waiting to see what is going to happen there. We also have, after I think it was 10 months, a young lady who was caught with cocaine strapped on her body, 20 pounds of cocaine strapped on her. She is now going to be sentenced. I'm sure you remember that she is a relative of a serving minister of government. So she is eventually going to be sentenced. And that came after lots and lots of pressure. I don't know why we always have to be lamenting and going on and going on and highlighting these issues before they're dealt with. However, we're happy that justice is going to be served, because we noticed that the young lady had to undergo all kind of medical examination and counseling. All kinds of things was happening to this particular young lady. But when we see these things happen, we wonder whether we are indeed having one Guyana, because so many other persons have been charged and placed before the courts, and they've been sentenced, not undergoing all kinds of evaluation and so on. But we're happy that this is happening. And so again, yes, MASH is in the air, and we are going to observe, let me say, happy MASH Romani to all of us. Tomorrow is the 23rd of February, and we are going to be observing 53 years. We are going to have the float parades in Georgetown, and you're going to see lots and lots of people out there mashing and doing what they have to do. Now, on a more serious note, we recognize that Guyana has been suspended from the Global Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative for failure to submit the 2020 report. I don't know why we have to, as a nation, continue to feel this kind of embarrassment. Every 2 mornings we facing these kinds of embarrassment. And these things happen because we have an installed regime that is not competent. And as a result of their incompetence, we are all made to feel the squeeze. Now, I saw the installed president a while ago on television making a statement, and he appeared to be very angry. I'm hoping that anger is not to caused us to not say anything, but I'm hoping that the persons who are responsible for that report not being submitted, that those persons are going to be dealt with condignly. And again, why can't we not be in the limelight for positive things? Why Guyana cannot be showcased for positive things? Too many negative activities, too many negative incidents. We have crowding our Guyana when we are promoting, as being a country with the fastest growing, one of the countries with the fastest growing economy and an oil producing nation. And these are the kinds of things we're having happening in here. Again, when you're not competent and when you give little boy big man shoes to wear, like persons would say, they can't do what they're supposed to do. However, we're not going to comment more on that at this time, but we're going to have with us our guest for this evening. And we also have one of our MPs who's going to be joining us shortly too. We have our guest in studio. He's backstage, Comrade Vincent Alexander. Many of you know Comrade Alexander, and so I don't have to do much of an introduction, but we're going to talk about this man, Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. We're going to talk about him this evening because I know there were lots of things that happened last week and during this week. And so we want to talk some more about Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. Comrade Vincent Alexander. Uh, Oh, yes, he's here with us. Good night to you, Comrade Alexander, and welcome again to Advancing the Cause. Like I said to our viewing public, we're going to talk a little more about Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. Um, I know you're no stranger to these kinds of programs, and you are just about one of the fittest person that we could have chosen to talk about Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. Um, your take.
Well, first of all, we are going to talk about him at a time when we are celebrating his 100th birth anniversary.
Mhm.
Man who was born in 1923 and whose birthday was on the 20th of this month, 20th of February.
Mhm.
And because it is his centennial birthday, a decision was taken to have one full year of celebration, which started on the 19th with the church service and will end next year, February, in an appropriate manner.
Good, good.
So those celebrations have started. As I said, we had the church service on Sunday. We had a television program on Sunday evening. We had the annual cycle race on Sunday as well, a cycle race from Carifesta Avenue. And that's an appropriate place because Carifesta is one of the institutions that Burnham created, to Belfield, where he lived, and back to Carifesta Avenue. And then on Monday, the National Congress of Women hosted the nation at their public road headquarters to have a ceremonial commencement of the year of activities. And that ceremonial commencement saw presentations being made as well as an exhibition of the works of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, his written speeches, photographic exhibition, and his voiceover as well. So we're on the road in terms of celebrating the life of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. And in doing so, we are looking to the past and an inspiration into the future based on the life of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, who in that circumstance we describe as a visionary. And some people say as a visionary, well, he was before his time. I understand what they mean when they say that he died before much of what he articulated was realized. I contend that he is not a man before his time for the following reason. First of all, his ideas were influenced by his own past, his own being, and by the circumstance in which he was articulating those ideas. But those ideas are still relevant to Guyana today. And the extent to which those ideas are still relevant to Guyana today, I will contend that he was not way ahead of his time because his ideas are coming to fruition even now, at a time when the conditions and circumstances are probably uh, more apt for the realization of his ideas. So, for example, we know Burnham started the exploration for oil. And he articulated what Guyana should be if we get oil and can do with oil. Here we are at a time, 100 years after his birth, 38 years after his death, and we have oil. So his idea has, in fact, something he started. The whole question of exploration didn't start recently. It started in Burnham time, and it has now come to fruition. So I would say it's his time. His idea is alive. His idea is with us, and that's only one of his ideas.
But
Yeah,
Vincent, before you go further, let me ask you, because I'm not sure whether persons know who Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham is or was. Could you tell us who was Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham?
let me say it this way. Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham was one of the regular school boys who got a scholarship to Queen's College. In those days, people paid to go to Queen's College, but there were few who could get scholarships after sitting certain exams, and he did that, and he got a scholarship to Queen's College. At Queen's College, he excelled and won the Ghana Scholarship in the year that he did his senior Cambridge. So that there's one single Ghana scholarship at that time. That's in the 40s. And he won that scholarship. As a consequence of winning that scholarship, he went on to do a BA, a Bachelor of Arts, which he did correspondence, and then went up to London to do his law degree. Whilst he was in London, he became a leader of the West Indian Student Society. So we started to see that this young man who had demonstrated brilliance by virtue of his path through school onto the Ghana Scholarship was now demonstrating a leadership. And so he became a leader of the West Indian Student Society, and he became a recognized debater. So he also demonstrated at that early stage in his life a particular quality. He was very articulate and a good orator. Having done law, he then was actually recommended by a Jamaican as someone who had leadership skills. And based on that recommendation, he came home, joined with Chedi Jagan, formed the People's Progressive Party. And in fact, he was the first chairman of the People's Progressive Party. They then contested elections in 1953. They won the elections, and he became the first Minister of Education of Guyana, first Minister of Education. Unfortunately, the British intervened, and they brought an end after 100 days to that government. There were then problems in the People's Progressive Party, which I would claim are ideological problems that caused a split in the party, and we had emerging what was the Burnhamite faction of the party and the Jaganite faction, and that occurred in 1955. By 1957, what was called the Burnhamite faction then became the People's National Congress, led by Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. Hence, he's sometimes called the founder because he was the founder leader of the People's National Congress and retained that position until his demise in 1985. Burnham then became the one who led Guyana to independence after he would have become the Premier of Guyana in 1964, the coalition government between the People's National Congress and the United Force. He became the premier. They continued the struggle for independence, and he led us to independence, which we attained in 1966. Having gotten independence, as a part of the agreement for independence, he then led us to Republican status in 1970. So we became the Cooperative Republic of Guyana in 1970. And so he was the first Prime Minister of Guyana in 1966 and continued until 1970 on to 1980 as our first Prime Minister. But subsequently, he became the first executive president when in 1980 became the first executive president when we promulgated a new constitution and continued in leadership until 1985 at its untimely demise. So
So,
Burnham was
Vincent,
our founder of the People's National Congress, first Prime Minister, first executive president, and a visionary because much of what we will talk about tonight occurred under the leadership of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, a real visionary leader, something which was manifest from the very inception in terms of his academic development, in terms of his studentship, in terms of him coming to leadership and actually giving leadership to us in the development process of Guyana.
so Vincent, and our viewers, as a matter of fact, our viewers, you're hearing from Comrade Alexander that the man we're talking about tonight, Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, he was the first Prime Minister of Guyana, first executive president. He was the first Minister of Education, if I'm correct, Vincent,
That's
and he
correct.
was also the leader of he was one of the founder members of the PPP party. And then we had that split, and then he branched off to having the PNC, forming the PNC. Vincent, as a Caribbean man, I know that there were other things that Burnham did, and of course, many persons, especially those within the PPPC's arena, they have been trying to downplay the work of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, even though we know that Burnham and Sheddy, they were there and they were working together towards us gaining our independence. Could you tell us about some of the other activities that Burnham was involved in, so that our especially our young viewers, they'll have a better understanding of who Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham is and what he did?
While as we talk about Guyana, we can describe Burnham as a nationalist. But
Mhm.
beyond that, we can also describe him as an integrationist because we see that Burnham was involved. In the first instance, I mentioned him giving leadership in London to the West Indies Student Society. When he returned home, then he worked with other Caribbean leaders to give leadership to the development of the integration movement in the Caribbean. And the first such thing which he did would have been when he formed with Bird and Barrow, Carifta. And they talk about the three Bs. Bird, Barrow, and Burnham came together to form an integration movement of those countries, Antigua, Barbados, and sorry, it would be Antigua, Barbados, and Guyana. So he was a founder of Carifta. Carifta eventually morphed into CARICOM, and we know we live CARICOM today and all the benefits of CARICOM, particularly in the area of education. Again, he was one of the founder leaders of CARICOM, and this time we saw Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, and Barbados coming together to form CARICOM in the first instance, and then the other countries joined. If I'm not mistaken, we now have, I think it's 13 or 15 members of CARICOM, Caribbean Integration Movement, the Caribbean Community. He also led in the field of cultural development. creative arts. He birthed the idea of Carifesta. And there was a conference in Guyana of the literary and creative arts individuals. That conference, he put forward the idea of Carifesta, a festival of Caribbean arts. And that festival was first held in Guyana in 1972 and has been held repeatedly across the region ever since. He birthed
Mhm.
that. He also was the one who birthed a relationship with Cuba. He gave leadership to the Caribbean in bringing Cuba into the fold and taking Cuba, in some regards, into the United Nations as well. So he also gave leadership in that regard. So Burnham, other than being a nationalist who would have given local leadership, was in fact someone who was one of the foremost leaders of Caribbean integration. And we have landmarks that we can still look at. Carifesta, we can still look at Carifesta. We can still look at CARICOM because Burnham was integral to the birthing of those regional bodies, regional institutions. So he was not only a nationalist, and that is why he was referred to and, in fact, given the accolade of the Caribbean man of the century, Caribbean man of the 20th century.
So Vincent, we are hearing that Burnham was given the accolade, the Caribbean man of the century. But right here in Guyana, you hear Burnham was a dictator. Burnham banned this. Burnham suffered the people. Burnham wanted you to be slaves because he formed the national service and you had to do this and you had to do that. And Burnham, all kinds of negative things you hear about this man, Burnham, in his own hometown, in his own home, in his own country. But in the wider Caribbean, you're hearing the people talking there differently about Burnham. As a matter of fact, let me mention this one. I remember about 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, no, it might have been more, because in 2013, the Caribbean Union of Teachers held their conference in Guyana after 21 years. That was in 2013, it was after 21 years. And quite a lot of the senior persons around the Caribbean within the teachers unions, they were all excited to return to Guyana. As a matter of fact, many of them commented this way. They said they remember there was a CUT conference in Trinidad, and Burnham was president of Guyana at that time. In Trinidad, they were having a crisis there and food shortage and all of that. And Burnham flew food of all kinds to Trinidad for that conference. We had Jean Persico, who was there at that time serving at the level of GTU, that's the Guyana Teachers Union. And so Burnham flew food from Guyana to Trinidad for that conference. He flew all sorts of liquor, as well as sending some of our servicemen to serve the teachers there, those who were part of the teachers union at that executive level. And that conference, there were in excess of 100 persons, 100 teachers there, and other special invitees. But while we hear our Caribbean people outside of Guyana talking about Burnham, we don't hear a lot of our own people talking about Burnham. We see lots of documentaries talking about Burnham being this dictator. Tell us something about that aspect of
Well,
Burnham.
I would disagree with you a wee bit that we don't hear a lot of old people talking about Burnham. We don't hear a lot of the opposition to Burnham, the People's Progressive Party talking about Burnham.
Yes, my bad.
But if you go on the ground, a lot of the ordinary people speak about Burnham, and they're the ones who describe him as a man before his time. And very often they say, if he were alive, what would have been the situation in Guyana? So there's a lot of a revisionism about Burnham by his detractors. And as you mentioned, a lot of that is centered around the question of food and the contention that he banned things. And so let me say this. There were some things that Burnham thought we ought not to be imported because we could have produced those things locally. And Burnham saw independence not merely as political independence. He saw independence as economic independence and the need for us to be able to be dependent on ourselves, particularly in the area of food security. And so there were some things that Burnham thought we shouldn't be importing, but he didn't just think we shouldn't import them. He thought and realized that there were substitutes for those things. I wouldn't even say substitutes, they were original things that we could be using. So, for example, in the area of preserved fruits, Burnham gave leadership to us being able to use carambola, which we grew a lot in the Pomeroon, and bilimbi, by finger and sauri, to make fruits and not to have to depend on raisins and things like that from overseas. So that he actually was providing us with the opportunity to produce, in so doing, to create jobs, in so doing, to save foreign currency to import the things we couldn't produce, in so doing, to create, in some regards, our own identity. So some of that band talk should be looked at against the background of what we refer to as self-sufficiency. And self-sufficiency is integral to a country's independence. So that Burnham was working towards the realization of economic independence. Now, very often when they talk about banning, flour becomes the big issue. And it's turned into an ethnic issue. Burnham did not ban flour. And I had the privilege some years ago of having Sis Narain, the late former Speaker of the National Assembly, volunteer at the function of the Burnham Foundation to explain the flour issue. Burnham did not ban flour. We acquired flour under something called the PL 480 program, which was funded by US aid. With some of the things that Burnham was doing, he ran into problems with the Americans, and they withdrew PL 480, and therefore they withdrew the funding which was being used to acquire the wheat so that we could have made flour. Because don't forget that we established our own flour mill. And what we import is the wheat and not the flour. So we had problems with acquiring the wheat, and therefore it was one of the restricted items, so to speak, because of the foreign exchange problems that we had. The flour was not banned. It was because the PL 480 program was no longer providing the resources that we couldn't import wheat to make flour. And bearing in mind that once Mr. Hoyt came to power and the PL 480 was restored, then flour was restored. But to say that Burnham banned flour, that's not true. But to say that he banned it because it was something used by the Indo-Guyanese, it's really mischievous. Because any Guyanese would tell you that flour is used by all Guyanese. So to try to present flour as something used by Indo-Guyanese or some religious something, and that Burnham was trying to spite Indo-Guyanese is a set of nonsense, because all of us use flour. Indians might have used it more for roti, but we all use it for bread. Everybody uses it for bread. So that it's really mischievous for them to contend, even if he had banned flour, that it was banned because he was anti-Indian and wanted to punish the Indians. He was punishing himself, if that were the case. He was punishing Afro-Guyanese, if that were the case. But he never banned the flour. It was a circumstance in the economic situation that caused us to have flour as a restricted item. Well, there were things which were not imported, and we got substitutes for those things locally. And let me say In that regard, even today, we do not any longer import saltfish. In the old days, we imported saltfish from Canada. And today, I think I can boast that we don't import an ounce of saltfish because Burnham encouraged us under his Feed, Clothes, and House program to produce using local materials. And one of the things we have in abundance, or had, the problems now with it and oil, was fish. And so on the Burnham, the saltfish industry was developed. And up to today, the saltfish we buy is essentially saltfish that came out of an industry developed on the Burnham. And that is why I said at the inception that Burnham is the man of all times. Because when you eat saltfish, he is still impacting our lives in that process of the production of things like saltfish because of his policies, his policy of self-sufficiency. Let us use what we have to produce, to feed ourselves, and be able to divert foreign currency to the things which we could not produce, and therefore to have all that we wanted, food on our tables produced locally, and other things imported. So that it's really, revisionist for them to go about saying that Burnham banned things and not to recognize that the big issue today, food security, biggest thing, Ghana is the chairperson in CARICOM for food security. Anybody who is chairing food security is walking in the shadow of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, because Guyana was described as the place that had the potential to be the food basket of the Caribbean. Guyana was the place where we emphasized the production of foods and where lots of things we no longer had to import because the farmers, the local farmers, were producing those things for local consumption and looking towards export. And even in the instance of the sugar industry, Burnham recognized the problems we were going to have with sugar and introduced diversification of the sugar. And I can tell you that it was opposed. Burnham sought to have the sugar industry start to produce lakai, start to produce mung, which are sources of protein. He even sought, as we continued within sugar, to the mechanization of the production of sugar. And there were those who used to burn the sugar fields, who also destroyed the machinery which we use for the mechanization of sugar. So there's a lot of ill that is attributed to Burnham, which is fiction of the highest degree. Burnham gave leadership to Guyana. Towards independence, we acquired political independence, and he continued giving leadership towards economic independence, its economic policies. Because of his foreign policy and some of the things he did in that regard, there were reactions from the West. And so we had some rough times that were a consequence of what the West was doing to us, as much as it was a consequence of what happened with oil in the early 70s. With the escalation of the price of oil, we no longer had the amount of foreign currency we wanted for the imports of other goods, since we had to continue importing oil for the greatest part of our foreign exchange. And so there's a lot to be told about Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham that lent to Ghana's development, and that is evident today in terms of where we are in Guyana. Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham is responsible for the paved roads in Guyana.
Wow.
From Caribbean right through to Perica, the paved roads. We didn't have paved roads before Burnham came to power. From Georgetown to Linden, we didn't have paved roads. And to add to that, when he did these things, we got bank for dollar. In other words, we got our money's worth. We have the
So,
Linden Sueslake Highway, built over 50 years. That needs to be rehabilitated, but it is still in a better state than roads built 2 or 3 years ago. We got value for our money. And so when people tell you about Burnham and the debt, what we borrowed, you can see what we did with the money.
so Vincent, I just hold for me for a minute. You're saying that LFS Burnham was the man behind us having paved roads from Corriverton to Perica. Am I
Correct?
getting you clear? Viewers, I'm hoping that you're all tuned in and you're listening to this, because just the other day, while we were in Parliament, we heard the minister who's responsible for public works talking about all these roads that they have done, and this how many spans of roads they have done and what they're going to do and how many roads they're going to build. And this is why it's important for us to be able to share, not only on a forum like this, but at other forums, works that were done, all the good things that were done by some of our leaders in the PNC, who came out of the PNC, who formed the PNC. Because many times the PPP's propaganda machine is there and they're working overtime and they talk all sorts of foolishness, all sorts of fictions they bring about, and all sorts of distractions. But I'm happy that you're here and you're saying to us, LFS Burnham was responsible for paved roads from Corriverton to Perica. You may continue, Vincent.
There are two other very important things that Burnham did. Rural electrification came under Lyndon Bob Sampson Burnham. Prior to Burnham coming into government, we had little or no electricity outside of Georgetown and probably in Amsterdam and Linden because of the bauxite company. Rural electrification was a program that Burnham embarked upon to bring power to the people throughout the length and breadth of Guyana, and did so successfully throughout the coast of Guyana. The other important thing he did, and these are fundamental things for human existence, he brought the system of potable and potable water to people in Guyana. We did
Man.
not have potable water along the coast. We may have had some potable water, but certainly not potable. Burnham created what was then called GAIWA. It has now morphed into GWI. And it was GAIWA that was established to bring potable water to the people throughout the coast with the intention of eventually going into the hinterlands. So if you go, for example, I think it's the Caledonian on the East Bank, and you see that big tank there, that was a part of the project to bring potable water. If you go to the village adjacent to Plaisance, and you see the treatment plant there, that was a part of the project to bring potable water. If you go to Buxton, and as you enter Buxton, you see that tank up in the air. That was a part of the project to bring potable water. So Burnham significantly introduced portable and potable water across the coast through an institution then called GAIWA, which is now called the GWI, and electricity, road electrification. Very significant things he did. Also, he expanded the education system in more than one way. In the first instance, he sought to bring about universal primary education. And so many primary schools, were built throughout the country. When he first came into government, secondary schools, you had to pay for them in the main. He emphasized and built primary schools throughout the country. And a significant example is what happened in Lenora, where a school there was destroyed during the disturbances, and Lenora was essentially an enclave of Indo-Guyanese. And they challenged Burnham, and Burnham showed them his government cared for all, and the Lenore School was one of the earliest schools which was rebuilt. And what he also did was to have the people involved, because in addition to the self-sufficiency I talked about, he also had a lot of projects done under self-help, so that he used his human capital, where there's the absence of financial capital, to get things done. And so a lot of the schools were built under self-help. I recall my own involvement as a student of Christ Church. Unfortunately, it has been burnt. But two-thirds of that school, which had been burnt, two-thirds of it was built by self-help.
Self-help.
The eastern wing and the western wing. And we, the students, were the ones who made the blocks. And under the supervision of one Mr. Squires, the technical person, we built those wings of that school. And what Burnham did, he had a program that allowed us to get hampers, so that I, as a schoolboy, if I worked 24 hours a week, I could take home a hamper. If I worked 48, an even bigger hamper. And that was not peculiar to the school I'm talking about. It was something that happened even in the instances where people were encouraged to build their own homes through cooperative societies. And one of the best examples of that would be the place we call Festival City, built by self-help. And you know what Burnham did? He allowed workers time off to be on the self-help project, building their own homes. Those workers did not have to face the bank that they couldn't face. The co-op became the body that mobilized the resources. The people mobilized their own labor, built their homes, and then were able to pay off for those homes over a period of time, and were not prevented from doing so by having to find some kind of collateral which they did not have. And we had numerous housing schemes across the country which were built in that manner. You have Tocqueville. And when Tocqueville was built, it was identified essentially for people from the trade union movement,
Yeah.
workers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You have stevedore. People don't know what that means. At one time, we didn't have cranes on the waterfront. It was manual labor. And so you had these guys who you call stevedores. And that scheme called stevedore scheme was for those people who were laborers on the waterfront to build and have their own homes. And so this question of housing ain't anything new. It ain't anything new. Burnham built housing at various levels. You had the working class involved in housing, and so Festival City and Stevedore and Tocqueville. You had housing for the middle class, and so you could come to South Rhinefeld for the middle class. You can go to places like Lamaha Gardens, where he facilitated housing for the upper class. And so he addressed all the classes in his projects. And when he did housing, it was not just giving people house lots. For most of the 23 years the PPP was in government, they gave people house lots, and the people had to find ways and means of building their own houses. I heard the minister and the ministry talk about professional housing the other day and said, we're not giving people just house lots, we're giving them a home. Well, thanks for that. Thanks that you have learned from what Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham was doing way back in the 70s. It's nothing new. It's nothing new. It is something that had been institutionalized in Guyana, giving people homes, giving people communities where there was water, where there was light, and where there were paved streets, and not just house lots. There's so much we can talk about when we talk about Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham in every sector, in local affairs, in foreign affairs. And as we talk about those things, we have to understand that it's because of what Burnham was doing, particularly in terms of foreign affairs, and in some regards, local affairs like nationalization, that he had the visitation of the powers that be, that was partly responsible for the economic problems which we were faced with. But there were benefits being derived from his policies. And even those who complained were beneficiaries of the policies, which in some regards they complained about.
Vincent, you have said so much to us. I know we can view this program again on YouTube. And so, viewers, I'm going to invite you to talk to your friends and tell them about what is happening here so that they can go on YouTube to view this program. Vincent, you've said to us that housing and feeding the nation is not something new. This is what is happening now is a repeat of what Burnham did. And like we would say, copycats, we copying from what Burnham. And so when you hear those PPP installed ministers standing in the National Assembly, and when they stand at other forums and talk about, we are doing this and we are doing that, maybe we need to give them a crash course and remind them that what they're doing here is not any favor you're doing for the people of this country. It's what you're obligated to do. And the way was already paved by Lyndon Forbes, Sampson Burnham, who served as Prime Minister and also President of this country. And so we need to remind folks, Festival City, that scheme there, like you said, was created by Burnham. And it was created through self-help. North Rumvelt and South Rumvelt Gardens, and here you're saying Lamaha Gardens for the middle class, and so many others. And I'm happy that you mentioned the Lenora Primary School as one of the schools that was built, one of the earliest school that was built, rebuilt, sorry. And so Burnham was there all about his people, and not the fake and the flam that we're seeing now, where we're talking about this one Guyana and one Guyana. In actual fact, there are two seeing. There's one Guyana for the elite, and there's another Guyana for the masses because of the way they're being treated. I'm happy you spoke about self-help, people building their own homes. As against, I'm not sure if our operator would be able to show you one of the homes that I saw them posting about on Facebook, and even I recognize Jerry Govine was on a path there talking about people should be thankful for this $5.5 million home. But I'm happy that you were able to say granted time off to citizens of this country so that they can go and build their blocks and build their homes. And so you were sure that if you spent $5, and I'm just using that number loosely here, $5, you got $5 worth, and not what we're having now, where you're building all kind of cow pens and fowl pens, and you're charging huge sums of monies that would take our citizens, an ordinary citizen, 8, 12, 15 years to repay. And then you're still talking about, oh, they still have some monies to do something else and to live on and all kinds of things, when we recognize that the cost of living is way above the heads of our ordinary Guyanese. Viewers, this is the Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham that we ought to know. A legend, a visionary, way beyond his time, a man who cared about his people. And so when we hear the PPP talk about, oh, and we're having water here, we're going to dig wells and put down wells and do this and do that. These were already paved ways that were paved by the PNC when they were in government. These were insights that were put out there by a visionary man. And I'm quite happy that we're able to share Burnham, even though he has passed so many years ago. Yes, this is the housing scheme, one of the housing schemes that we're going to have there. And viewers, you can judge from yourself what that looks like. That looks like a prison in itself. And this, if you look at the homes that were built how many years ago, 28, 38 years ago, you'll see many, many of those homes that our residents are living in South Rumvelt and in North Rumvelt and in Festival City and in Tugville. Those homes, many of them are still there in their original state. Just a few repairs would have had to be done to them. Of course, some of our residents, some citizens would have added on and so on, but they are right there. The water you talked about, Vincent, I don't know what is happening now, and over and over and over again, I have to be saying, well, we need Dr. Van West Charles again, because we have GWI and many, many of our residents. I, for one, I am having brown, discolored water coming through the taps in my home. And so when you attempt to wash your white clothing, you have to put water in a tub, add Marvex bleach to that water for about a good hour, half an hour to an hour before you soak down those clothes. And you can't put it in your washing machine because your clothes is discolored. And so when we want to talk about, when we hear the PPP talk about the foolishness, then we must be able, and viewers, you must be able to say to them on their Facebook pages, what you're doing here is just following a pattern that was already set. Vincent, I know LFS Burnham served as the Minister of Education. Uh, we'd be happy for you to shed some light on that. I know our time is running away from us, but we have to talk about LFS Burnham, and more so since we are observing his birth and death anniversary. And our young people, quite a lot of our young people, don't know about LFS Burnham except for the negatives that they're hearing being peddled by the PPP. But before you go there, Vincent, I learned that you were having an exhibition highlighting the work of Burnham, which you did mention. But what about our schools? Did we send out invitation to our schools so that our children in school could come out there and see and hear for themselves some of his voice notes, or voice over tones, as you call them, and read some of his speeches and look at some of what this man Burnham was involved in?
Well, we did start our centennial celebrations in Kitty. Burnham himself came from Kitty, and more specifically, he came from the what is now called the F.E. Burnham Primary School, which was Kitty Methodist School. And so we thought, since we were having this celebration in Kitty, that we would invite the schools around the area to visit and to see the exhibits, which are exhibits of fact, it's not propaganda, and to understand a part of the history. And what occurred was they wrote to the Ministry of Education, uh, following the protocols, asking them to give the schools permission to visit the exhibition. There was some reluctance in terms of us getting a written answer. But when they were visited, we were told that, there's Mashramani, and therefore the school children will be busy and will not have an opportunity to visit the exhibition. Shortly after, a circular came out, which circular sought to speak to schools only going to places that were listed for visitation, and virtually threatening penalties on teachers and headmistresses who took children to places other than those listed. So I would say it's quite coincidental that that circular came out at the time when we had been told that the children will not be able to come, ostensibly because of Mashramani. But you see, it reminds me of an incident last year where the Burnham Foundation sought to have an exhibition for independence at the National Library. Permission was granted, and on the morning when the exhibition was supposed to be launched, I got a phone call indicating that the library had its own program. I don't know that they didn't know all along that they were going to have their own program till the morning of the commencement of hours, and therefore we could no longer use the library. So one has to view with some suspicion that circular at that time, because we were literally thrown out of the library. Fortunately, we were able to use the avenue. And here, I have a situation where it may be true that the children had mashimani activities, but the schools were not given the option uh, to participate in visiting the exhibition in instances where they might not have been occupied. They just were told flatly that because of the mashimani activities, they couldn't be available to visit the exhibition. So we seem to have a problem in terms of an attempt to suppress information pertaining to the life and the works of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, as others seek to impose themselves and their party on this dear country of ours.
Vincent, I just want to emphasize here and to let our viewers understand that the PPP, they're a wicked set of people. Now, here it is, you're having an exhibition of a leader, a past president, the first executive president of this country. And you want to tell us that because of matrimony celebrations, and we should remember, matrimony came about as a result of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. And we got that word from our Amerindian brothers and sisters. And so to nobody was there to indoctrinate those students. What you had there were pictures showing the various places he visited and signing of agreements. And you had the voice overtone there, the voice messages there, and the works, actually the works of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham being portrayed there, showcasing one of our leaders, one of the greatest leaders that this country would have ever seen. And it's a shame that the Minister of Education, who was educated under the PNC government, that they took this stand. But you know what? It wouldn't last for long. But I would want to congratulate the schools who sent their students there. And I think this is a private school that was visiting there that we're seeing on the screen. I want to congratulate them for taking that bold step and for recognizing the importance of our history. This is what has shaped us. And at no time, let me say this, at no time schools are emptied for matrimony costume competitions that would have been had. At no time the schools are empty. What you have happening is groups of students from schools are taken to the National Cultural Center and to the various other places, venues that they would have around the country, and you have selected students who are taken to view the competitions. No school is emptied at the time of matrimony costume competitions, or when you have the dance competitions, or when you have the poetry competitions, or even when you have the steel pan competitions. Schools are not being emptied at that time. So the flimsy kinds of excuses that we get, all it is doing is showing up the wickedness of this present installed government. And I needed to let our viewers know that. Yes, Vincent, you may continue.
I wanted to reference a recent occurrence. There was something called President Cup, a football competition. And that's a good thing. But the official from the Football Federation, I think it is, who was put in charge of this, went on national television and said that this is something new in Guyana. It is the first time that all 10 regions are being involved in any kind of sporting activity. I said to myself, good God, what a travesty.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In Guyana, in the 80s, we had something called the Guyana Games,
Mm-hmm.
where all 10 regions participated, not only in football, in athletics, and all sorts of things, all 10. And here is this youngster, misinformed, probably uneducated, telling this nation that this is the first time that we are having a sporting activity that involves all of the country, when in fact we had institutionalized the Guyana Games, where teams came from each region to compete among themselves. That young man owes us an apology for being not just an apologist, but being someone who was spreading fiction about the realities of this country. I can go on to say that in 1977, when I became the chairman of the Young Socialist Movement, we had a Congress, and this wasn't government, but it was a PNC, which brought young people from all 10 regions, all. We called it the Congress Festival. But a part of that Congress Festival was sporting activities where among the regions they contested. And that predated Guyana Games. In fact, we would claim that we were the forerunners for Guyana Games. And I remember vividly how well Region 7 performed. And more particularly, the young people from Ramadan were about the best football team in 1977 that came to that Congress Festival. And do you know what? Up to today, whenever you have inter-school football, Ramadan continues to be one of the best teams and a team which on occasions won the inter-school football competition. They didn't come from Georgetown. But Ramadan is somewhere up the Mazuri area.
Mm-hmm.
And here was this young man telling this nation, and young people who would not know better, that President's Cup is the first time in this country. He didn't restrict it to football. He said the first time they have it, any kind of game where Guyanese from all the regions are involved. In some
Uh,
other
uh,
countries, what would have happened to him is unbelievable.
Vincent, I'm wondering if this is the same young man who couldn't pronounce a word. And if that's the same young man, then he's in a sorry state, like many of his colleagues. This young man, he forgot outside of sports, mass games, where we had students from all across this country. He is forgetting that we have the national schools athletics, swimming, cycling, and track and field and swimming and cycling championship. He forgot that. And that happens every year. So these people are just conveniently remembering what they want to remember. And we as a people should hold them accountable. And of course, you're not going to get the apology you're looking for. But this is our way of saying to our people and informing of our people and correcting the misinformation that is being spewed across this country. I know that our time is running out on us, and so we have just about 3 minutes before we wrap up. Vincent, I'll allow you the opportunity to offer your closing remarks.
Undoubtedly, Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham was a man of vision. And the monuments are still evident in terms of what he did to bring development to Guyana. We cannot ignore the fact that there were difficulties and there were difficult times. It's like a woman in labor, painful but successful. So we did have problems. Some of them were problems caused by our international posture and that we dared to challenge the status quo. Some may have been caused by mistakes. For example, it was a mistake for us to have removed the train system. It was a judgment call. At that time, fuel was extremely cheap. It was easier to get trucks to take things to the point and the train which would take things to the station. So we opted for transportation using fossil fuel. That turned out to be a mistake. But when one looks at the overall picture, Burnham had a vision, was moving the country in a particular direction, and today his vision is still relevant. Many things which are being done under different nomenclature are things that he started. And we should be inspired, even today, by Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham in our endeavor to make Guyana the place we would wish it to be.
Well, Vincent, I want to
Burnham
thank.
lives forever.
Sorry. I want to thank you so much for being here with us, Vincent. But I can't go without mentioning these two. Burnham was the person who created the President's College. And Vincent, you and I know the state of the President's College at this time. As a matter of fact, there was an attempt to remove the bust of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham from that school. But the students there, they fought and they decided that it was not going to be removed. And so we still have the bust of Burnham at President's College. But when we look at the level at which President's College is at now, it's no longer the School of Excellence. And I would have thought that somebody like Nigel Dharamlal, who attended President's College and was given the best of education, that he would have been one of the persons fighting to ensure that President's College continue to fly that flag very, very high and continue to be the school of excellence competing way above Queen's College. But it's no longer happening because as far as they're concerned, that's a Burnham school. The other school I need to mention is St. Sidwell's Primary, that has always been adopted by the president. And so after President Burnham died, President Hoyt adopted that school, and he continued to maintain that school with whatever finances and so on that were allotted to the president's office. But unfortunately, we saw in 1992, when Shelley Jagan became president, we no longer had that kind of attention being given to St. Sidwell's Primary School. And if you pass there, for those of you who live in Georgetown, if you pass there, you'll see the condition of that school. You'll see what is happening there. I know under the coalition government, there were lots and lots of work was done at that school. But these are things that we as a people ought to know. And we must ensure that some of these standards are maintained. We must demand that these standards are maintained. But I know that our time is running away from us, and we have to give way for In the Ring by the Honorable Sherrod Duncan. And so, viewers, I want to thank you for being here with us. I want to also thank Vincent again for being here with us. And Vincent, you have to come again to tell us some more about Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, since we have an entire year to celebrate the works of this great man. We cannot doubt the fact that Burnham was indeed a visionary. He was the man for the people. He was the man with a vision for this country. And regardless of how people want to twist or turn or distract from the legacy of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, will continue to live on. And he will continue to be the inspiration that every single one of us will have to follow, whether we want to call it by another name or we want to change the phrase. Like I'm noticing, we're no longer saying one people, one nation, one destiny, but we're touting one Guyana. Regardless of what they try to do, the vision of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham will continue to live on. May God continue to bless you, our viewers, and I see you again next week at 6:30 for another episode of Advancing the Cause. Do stay safe. Remember, COVID is still with us, and so you need to wear your mask. You need to sanitize as often as possible. You need to encourage others to do that. And do be safe when you have to use the roads, because we recognize lots and lots of accidents are happening all across this country. Do stay safe. And for those boys who were arrested and charged, we want to reassure you that the opposition is there and we will continue to support you. We are going to continue to be there as vigilant as ever so that the kinds of painting that we are seeing on especially Afro-Guyanese, that is going to be erased pretty soon. Again, my viewers, thank you for being here with us and do have a good night. Take care. Bye-bye.